The landlord said the previous tenant moved out suddenly. The neighbors said he never moved out at all. Zoe Anderson stood in the hallway of flat number 4, her suitcase still by the door, and listened to the pipes groan behind the wall like something breathing. The letting agent had told her the flat was a steal, £600 a month in a city where everything else cost double. She should have asked why. She should have asked why the last tenant's name was still on a torn envelope wedged behind the radiator. Why the smell of him, cheap cologne and cigarette smoke, still clung to the curtains. Why Mrs. Beatrice Pemberton next door crossed herself every time she looked at Zoe's front door. On her third night, at 3:14 in the morning, Zoe woke to the sound of her own name. Not shouted, whispered, close to her ear, close enough to feel breath that wasn't there. She sat up in the dark and saw the outline of a young man standing at the foot of her bed, soaking wet, water pooling silently on the carpet that stayed dry by morning. He opened his mouth. No sound came out, just her name, over and over, shaped by lips that had no air behind them. If that opening already has your skin crawling, you are not ready for what's coming. This is a true nightmare, built from real fear, the kind that lives in the quiet corners of a city far from home. Hit like right now, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because what happened to Zoe Anderson in that flat is going to follow you long after this video ends. Zoe Anderson had never felt cold like this before. Lagos heat didn't prepare a person for a Leeds winter, and she stood at the arrivals gate of the airport wrapped in a jacket her aunt had bought her that still wasn't thick enough, watching her breath turn to fog in the air. She was 22 years old, a fresh scholarship recipient in structural engineering, and she carried with her 2 suitcases, a laptop with a cracked corner, and the weight of every hope her mother had ever placed on her shoulders. Her mother had sold a small parcel of land in Ogun State to help cover the gap the scholarship didn't fill. Zoe had promised her she wouldn't waste a single kobo of that sacrifice. Finding a place to live turned out to be its own kind of war. Every agency wanted a UK guarantor she didn't have. Every landlord wanted 6 months' rent up front from a student with no credit history in the country. Zoe spent her first 10 nights in a hostel near the university, refreshing property websites until her eyes burned, watching her savings shrink with every passing day. Then she found it. A 1-bedroom flat on Marrowbeck Lane, 15 minutes from campus, £600 a month including bills. Everything else in that postcode was closer to $1,200. She should have felt suspicious. Instead, she felt saved. The letting agent, a thin, nervous man named Selwyn Draycott, met her outside the building with a folder of paperwork and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He told her the previous tenant had moved out suddenly, a job opportunity down south, nothing more to it. He said it fast, the way people say things they've rehearsed. Zoe didn't catch the strangeness of it then. She was too busy calculating how many months of rent this would save her, too busy imagining herself finally unpacking her things instead of living out of a suitcase. She signed the lease on a Thursday afternoon and moved in that same evening, dragging her cases up 2 flights of stairs while the building's only working light flickered above her head. The flat itself was small but clean enough, with a narrow kitchen, a bedroom just large enough for a single bed and a desk, and a bathroom with tiles the color of old teeth. There was a strange smell she couldn't place at first, something like cheap cologne mixed with old cigarette smoke, buried deep in the curtains and carpet, the kind of smell that no amount of opened windows seemed to shift. She told herself it was just what empty flats smelled like after sitting on the market too long. She unpacked her clothes, hung a small Nigerian flag on her wall beside a photo of her mother, and called her best friend, Chiamaka Nwosu, back in Lagos to tell her the good news. £600, Chiamaka! For a whole flat to myself, Zoe said, phone pressed to her ear as she folded a blanket onto the bed. You would not believe my luck. Nothing is that cheap for no reason, Chiamaka said, her voice crackling faintly over the connection. Ask around. Abroad is not like here. Things hide differently there. Zoe laughed it off, told her friend she was being dramatic, and hung up feeling lighter than she had in weeks. That first night she slept soundly, exhausted from the move, and woke up the next morning to sunlight struggling through gray clouds and the ordinary sounds of a new city coming alive outside her window. It felt, for the first time since she'd landed, like the beginning of something good. The first strange thing happened on her second night. She woke around 2 in the morning to the bedroom door, standing wide open, though she distinctly remembered closing it before bed, the way she always did, a habit from home where doors left open invited mosquitoes and worse. She got up, closed it again, checked the latch twice, and went back to sleep, telling herself it must not have caught properly the first time. By the third night, the door was open again, and this time she was certain, because she had tested the latch herself, pushing it until she heard the click. Her downstairs neighbor was an elderly woman named Beatrice Pemberton, a widow who had lived in the building for almost 30 years and spent most of her afternoons tending a small collection of potted geraniums on the shared windowsill in the stairwell. Zoe met her properly on her 4th day, when Beatrice stopped her on the stairs with a look that seemed to already know something Zoe didn't. "You're the new girl in number 4, Beatrice said, not quite a question. Zoe Anderson." Beatrice studied her for a long moment, her eyes moving over Zoe's face like she was searching for something. "The last one that lived up there," she said finally. "Quiet lad, foreign like yourself. African too, I believe, though I couldn't tell you where from. He was a nice boy, always said good morning." She paused, her hand tightening slightly on the stair rail. "He stopped saying good morning about 2 years back. Landlord said he'd moved off sudden. Job somewhere south." She looked at Zoe with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite fear. "Funny thing is, I never saw him carry a single box out of that building. Not one." Zoe felt a chill move through her that had nothing to do with the Leeds weather. She thanked Beatrice for the welcome and hurried up the rest of the stairs, telling herself the old woman was simply lonely, filling her days with stories to have something to talk about. But that night, lying in bed with the door closed and latched and checked 3 times, Zoe couldn't shake the image of a young man's boxes never leaving the building. The cold spot appeared on her 5th night. She noticed it first while brushing her teeth, a patch of air near the bedroom window that felt like stepping into a walk-in freezer, sharp and sudden, gone the moment she stepped sideways out of it. She stood in that spot for almost a full minute, arms wrapped around herself, breath fogging faintly in air that should not have been cold enough to fog. The heating was on. She had checked the radiator herself, but that patch by the window stayed cold no matter what she did, as though something was standing there that didn't want to be warm. By her first week's end, Zoe had started sleeping with a small lamp on, something she hadn't done since she was a child. She told herself it was just the adjustment, the strangeness of a new country, a new bed, new sounds settling into her nervous system. Her structural engineering coursework had started, and she buried herself in lectures and study groups, trying to drown the unease with exhaustion. It worked, for a few days. Exhaustion is a powerful thing. It makes people ignore what they shouldn't ignore. Then came the night she heard her name. It was 3:14 in the morning, and Zoe woke without knowing why, the way a person sometimes wakes when something in a room has changed. The lamp was still on, casting its small yellow circle across the desk and the edge of the bed. And there, close to her ear, close enough that she felt the ghost of breath against her skin, though the room around her stayed perfectly still, a voice whispered her name, Zoe. She sat bolt upright, heart slamming, and scanned the room. Nothing. The door was closed. The window was locked. But the cold spot by the window had spread, filling nearly a third of the room, and for one impossible second, she thought she saw the outline of a person standing in it, tall, thin, soaked through, as though he'd just walked out of a river, water darkening the carpet beneath his feet. She blinked, and he was gone. The carpet, when she forced herself to check it with trembling hands, was completely dry. She didn't sleep again that night. She sat with her back against the headboard, phone gripped in her hand, refreshing nothing, just needing the small light of the screen for company, until dawn crept gray and reluctant through her curtains. When she finally worked up the courage to mention it to Beatrice the next afternoon, the old woman's face went pale in a way that told Zoe she wasn't the first person to describe that particular cold, that particular whisper, that particular soaked and silent figure. "You should ask the landlord who really lived there before you," Beatrice said quietly, glancing up and down the stairwell, as though the walls themselves might be listening. "And you should ask him why he never lets that flat sit empty for more than a fortnight. He's had 4 tenants in that unit in 2 years, dear. 4. And not one of them stayed past 3 months." She reached out and gripped Zoe's wrist with surprising strength for a woman her age. "Whatever you saw last night, it's not going to stop at whispering your name. You need to be careful. You need to find out what happened to that boy before it decides you're not worth being careful with." Zoe walked back up to her flat that evening, with Beatrice's warning sitting heavy in her chest, and when she reached her door, she found it standing open again, though she was absolutely certain, this time, more than any time before, that she had locked it before leaving that morning. Inside, everything sat exactly as she'd left it, except for one thing. On her desk, beside her laptop, sat a small, curling photograph she had never seen before. A young man's face, smiling faintly up at her, water damaged at the edges, as though it had spent a very long time somewhere wet and dark before finding its way onto her desk. If you're already getting chills wondering who that boy in the photograph is, you need to comment "no way" right now and hit subscribe, because what Zoe finds out about him next is going to make you question everything you thought you knew about that flat, that landlord, and exactly how many people never made it out of Marrowbeck Lane. Zoe didn't sleep that night either. She sat at her desk with the water-damaged photograph propped against her lamp, studying the young man's face, trying to place him, trying to understand how a picture of a stranger had appeared on her desk in a locked flat. He looked to be in his early 20s, dressed in a university hoodie, laughing at whoever held the camera, completely unaware that his image would end up haunting the desk of a girl who wouldn't move into this flat for another 2 years. The next morning, exhausted and hollow-eyed, Zoe went looking for answers. She started with the letting agency, cornering Selwyn Draycott at his desk, with the photograph held out between them, like evidence in a trial. "Who is this?" she asked, no greeting, no small talk left in her. Draycott's face did something complicated. A flicker of recognition quickly buried under practiced blankness. "I couldn't say," he said. "Where did you find that?" "On my desk. In my locked flat." He shifted in his seat, gathered a stack of papers that didn't need gathering, and told her he had appointments to get to. Zoe left the office with nothing but the certainty that he knew exactly who the boy in the photograph was, and had no intention of telling her. She turned instead to the internet, sitting in the university library that evening with her laptop open, searching every combination of words she could think of. Missing student Leeds. African student disappeared Marrowbeck. International student vanished flat. Most searches turned up nothing useful, but on the 4th page of one particular search, she found a small item from a university newsletter, archived from 2 years earlier, barely 3 sentences long. A postgraduate engineering student named Kwame Boadu, originally from Kumasi, Ghana, had been reported as having withdrawn from his program without notice. The university wished him well in his future endeavors. No further comment was made. The item was dated almost exactly 2 years before Zoe had moved in. She searched his name directly after that and found almost nothing. A single social media profile, unused for over 2 years, its last post a photograph of Kwame standing outside a building that Zoe recognized immediately because she walked past its front door every single day. It was her building. He was smiling in the photograph, keys held up to the camera, the caption reading simply, "New home, new start, wish me luck." The comments beneath it, all in the past tense now, were filled with friends asking if he was all right, asking why he'd gone quiet, asking if anyone had heard from him. The most recent comment, posted 8 months ago, was from a woman who appeared to be his sister. It read only, "Please, if anyone knows anything, please contact me. It has been 2 years. We have not stopped looking." Zoe closed her laptop and sat very still in the library. The photograph of Kwame Boadu, now making a terrible kind of sense on her desk at home. He hadn't moved out suddenly for a job down south. He hadn't left at all. Somehow, some way, he was still in that flat, and he had chosen her, of all the tenants who must have come and gone, to reach out to. That night, Zoe searched the flat itself with a determination that scared her a little, running her hands along every wall, checking behind every piece of furniture the landlord had left behind. In the airing cupboard, behind the hot water tank, she found a panel that didn't sit quite flush with the wall around it, and when she pried it loose with a butter knife, her hands shaking, she found a small space behind it, and inside that space, a leather journal, swollen and warped from old water damage, along with a single trainer, waterlogged and moldering, and a student ID card bearing the photograph she already recognized. Kwame Boadu's face looked up at her from the laminated card, his university details still crisp despite the damage around it. She carried the journal to her bed and read it by lamplight, her heart climbing steadily into her throat with every page. Kwame had written about the same things she had experienced: the cold spot by the window, the door that wouldn't stay locked, the whispers that started as her name did for her, but had started as his name for him. His entries grew shorter and more frantic as the journal progressed. He wrote about seeing a figure in the flat that wasn't the same one whispering his name, an older man, standing in the kitchen doorway at night, watching him with an expression Kwame described only as hungry. He wrote about the landlord, a different one back then, a man he referred to only as the old man who owns the building, visiting late at night without being asked, letting himself in with a key Kwame hadn't given him, standing in the flat's small living room and simply looking around, as though checking on something, as though making sure something was still contained. The final entry in the journal, dated almost exactly 2 years before that night, was barely a paragraph. Kwame wrote that he had found a way into the building's basement, a space the landlord had told him didn't exist, accessible through a door in the shared laundry room that was always kept locked. He wrote that he intended to go down there the following night to understand once and for all what was happening to him, because he could no longer live with not knowing. He wrote one final line beneath that, in handwriting that had begun to shake. "If something happens to me, it lives in the walls of this building, and it does not let go once it has your name." Zoe closed the journal and sat in the dark for a long time, the cold spot by her window pulsing faintly colder than it had ever been before, as though something in the room had heard her reading and approved. The next day, she went to the laundry room in the building's shared basement and found the door Kwame had written about, exactly where he said it would be, locked with a heavy padlock that looked considerably newer than the door itself. She knocked on Beatrice's door that evening, journal in hand, and told the old woman everything, watching Beatrice's face grow paler with every detail. "I told you to be careful," Beatrice said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to say more than that because I didn't think you'd believe me, and I didn't want you thinking an old woman had lost her mind. But I've heard that landlord, the current one, the son of the old man Kwame wrote about, going down to that basement at night. I've heard him talking to something down there. I've heard him say a name that wasn't his own, over and over, like he was trying to convince someone, or something, of who he was bringing home next." Zoe felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her. "Bringing home," she repeated. Beatrice nodded slowly. "Foreign students, dear. Every single tenant in that flat for as long as I can remember has been from somewhere far away, somewhere their families can't easily come looking, somewhere a missing person report gets filed and then quietly forgotten because nobody local pushes hard enough to keep it open." She reached out and took Zoe's hand in both of hers, her grip trembling now. I think that flat isn't haunted by accident, Zoe. I think somebody built it to be exactly what it is, and I think they choose their tenants very, very carefully. That night, back in her flat, Zoe heard footsteps on the stairs long after midnight, slow and deliberate, stopping directly outside her door. She lay frozen in bed, listening to the handle turn, watching in horror as the door that she had triple-checked was locked swung slowly open on its own, revealing not the soaked, silent figure of Kwame Boadu standing in the hallway, but a man she didn't recognize, standing perfectly still, staring directly at her, with an expression Kwame's journal had already warned her about. Hungry, he raised one hand toward her, and in a voice that sounded like it was being dragged up from somewhere very deep and very cold, he said her full name, first and last, a name she had never once given to anyone in that building. If your heart is pounding right now and you need to know how Zoe survives this, comment, reveal it, and hit subscribe immediately, because the truth about that basement, that landlord, and exactly how many students have vanished through that flat is about to come out, and it is worse than anything you've imagined so far. Zoe didn't scream. Some deep ancestral instinct told her that screaming would only invite the thing in the doorway closer, so instead, she stayed perfectly still, breath held, watching the man who was not quite a man study her from her threshold with those hungry, patient eyes. After what felt like an hour but could only have been seconds, he stepped backward into the hallway, and the door swung shut on its own, latch clicking closed exactly as it should have been all along. Zoe didn't move again until sunlight forced its way through her curtains, and even then, she moved like someone walking through glass. She called Chiamaka first, voice shaking so badly her friend could barely understand her at first. Chiamaka listened without interrupting, and when Zoe finished, she said the thing that finally gave Zoe somewhere to stand. "There's a Nigerian church near the university, Zoe. Pastor Uchenna Balogun runs it. My cousin's husband knows him. Go to him. Some things we don't leave to landlords and letting agents to solve. Go now." Pastor Balogun turned out to be a broad, calm man in his 50s who listened to Zoe's entire story without a flicker of disbelief, nodding slowly as she described the cold spot, the whisper, the journal, the man in her doorway. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I have heard of this building before," he said finally. "Not by name, but by story. There is a particular kind of evil that grows when the living learn to profit from people the world already treats as disposable. Foreign students, dear, especially those of us from home, we are easy to overlook here. Our families are far away. Our disappearances make small print in a university newsletter, not headline news. Someone understood that a very long time ago, and I believe they built something in that basement to take advantage of it." He looked at her steadily. "Whatever lives down there, it did not simply appear on its own. Someone fed it, on purpose, over a very long time, and I do not believe it stops feeding, unless someone makes it stop." That evening, Pastor Balogun accompanied Zoe and Beatrice down to the laundry room, and together they broke the padlock on the basement door with a pair of bolt cutters Beatrice produced from what she called her useful things cupboard. The stairwell beyond smelled of standing water, and something underneath that, something organic and wrong. At the bottom, a single bulb flickered over a narrow room lined with old storage boxes, and against the far wall, a second door, newer than everything around it, fitted with 3 separate locks. Behind that door, they found what remained of Kwame Boadu, along with the remains of at least 2 others Beatrice hadn't known to grieve for, students who had rented flat number 4 in the years before him, their belongings sealed away in the dark alongside them, their disappearances filed away just as quietly. Pinned to the wall above them, a collection of photographs and student ID cards stretched back further than Zoe wanted to count, a private ledger of a landlord's family, keeping something fed for longer than she had been alive. The current landlord, when confronted, did not deny it so much as seem almost relieved to finally stop pretending. He told them, in a flat, exhausted voice, that his father had made an arrangement decades earlier, the kind of arrangement men make when they believe they are protecting a family business at any cost, and that the thing in the basement had been part of that arrangement ever since. Fed carefully, chosen carefully, always someone whose absence would ripple only faintly across an ocean, rather than through the community around it. He wept when the police finally arrived, though whether from guilt or relief, Zoe never decided. The investigation that followed made local news for exactly 4 days before the story faded, the way these stories often do. Kwame Boadu's sister flew in from Kumasi to finally bring her brother home, and she held Zoe's hands at the small memorial gathering Pastor Balogun organized, thanking her for a persistence that had cost Zoe her own peace of mind, but had given the family something they had spent 2 years without: certainty. The landlord was arrested, though what would ultimately be provable in a court of law about the thing in the basement remained, even among the detectives who worked the case, a subject nobody wanted to speak about too directly. Zoe moved out of Marrowbeck Lane within the week, into a small shared house near campus that Beatrice, of all people, helped her find through a former tenant's daughter. She finished her degree in structural engineering 2 years later, graduating with the kind of quiet, hard-won relief that only someone who has survived something unspeakable can carry. She kept Kwame's journal, waterlogged pages and all, in the bottom drawer of her desk for the rest of her time in Leeds, not as a souvenir of horror, but as a reminder of exactly what she had learned in that flat, that the people most easily made to disappear are the ones the world has already decided not to look for too closely, and that the only real defense against that kind of quiet evil is refusing to stay quiet in return. Years later, working as a structural engineer back in Lagos, Zoe would occasionally tell the story to younger cousins preparing to study abroad, not to frighten them away from opportunity, but to remind them of something her own mother had taught her long before any of this began. Cheap is not the same as safe. Silence is not the same as peace. And the people who leave home to build a better future for themselves deserve to have someone, somewhere, watching out for them, because the world will not always do it on its own. Marrowbeck Lane still stands today, its basement sealed permanently under a fresh concrete floor, its fourth flat left deliberately empty on the new owner's instructions, a small, quiet monument to every student who almost vanished there, and to the one who finally made sure the rest of them were found.